Recently, we've also become the Center for Defense Innovation as opposed to just the Center of Gravity for Entrepreneurship. We have AFWorks, DIU, and Army Futures Command all under one roof here at Capital Factory. And nowhere else in the U.S. are those three agencies all under one roof. We want to make sure that startups are meeting them. We want to make sure that they're driving innovation so that they can work with our government and keep the nation safe. So that's why we've recently also become, the Center for Defense Innovation here in Texas and the U.S. So really looking forward to continue to build these relationships, get startups plugged into the different agencies that we're partnered with, and continue to go from there. So this is the fourth Tuesday of every month, Founder Story. Like I was mentioning earlier, every Tuesday we have a different event, Intro to Fundraising in Texas, AMA, usually led by either Josh or, and also bringing in a local investor to participate in that. He'll ask questions and we open up for Q&A. And then at the end of that, as well with the other three, we have a happy hour that concludes the event. So that's Intro to Fundraising in Texas. Second Tuesday, Intro to Austin Startup Scene. We bring in another player here, either a serial entrepreneur, a different incubator or accelerator, maybe an investor for this one, or a mentor of ours. Another form of sharing about how Austin became the startup scene it is today. And also open up for Q&A and an AMA. How to become a mentor or investor. That's another event that we have that's curated by Caroline Tospath. If you're interested in learning more, happy to talk to you about that. Third Tuesday is also our Defense Innovation AMA. Similar format to 1 and 2, and also monthly we have road trips up to one of the other cities that are here in Texas. And they include Epic Office Hours and fundraising in Texas. And then the fourth Tuesdays, Founder Story. And with that, I will bring up Kevin Przybocki to the stage. He founded New Systems back in 2003, a market leader in network impairment emulators and network monitoring switches. Now I know what that is because I looked it up about 20 minutes ago. So I'm going to let Kevin jump in and share a little bit about exactly what that means.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah. All right. Well, great to be here. Thanks for coming. So we started New Systems in 2003, and actually sold the company in 2012 to Ixia, a large public, not large public, but a public company, a test and measurement company. A network emulator is a piece of hardware. We called it an impairment emulator that we started to recreate real-world network effects in a lab setting. So you could basically on a fiber optic cable in a test environment inject different types of things that would be undesirable, but that would be in a real world. So delay very precisely could be inputted into the signal a certain number of milliseconds. You could delay the signal, you could inject bit errors, and you could drop a certain percentage of packets, and you could do all of these things at once or different combinations. And so that was the idea, is to test what was really going to happen before you had to actually buy a network or launch a product and see if your application would work. So some of our customers would literally on a test bench from one side of the table to the other run a bandwidth heavy application like a video application and inject certain types of delays and errors and watch the picture start either freezing or graying out or fuzzing out.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So let's start your pre-entrepreneurial experience. Let's start a little bit with your background. Did you always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or was it kind of just serendipity and more opportunity that popped up?
Yeah, it was more that once I had been out working for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years in the workforce, I think I started getting the itch that I wanted to do something smaller, something with more, where I could have more control over the decision making and the direction, as I had been But when I got out of school, no, I was headed toward larger companies where I could get good experience, and didn't see myself as a risk taker per se. It was only, I guess, after maybe getting a little bit burned out in those environments, or a little bit frustrated that I wasn't, moving quickly enough, having enough authority to do what I wanted, that I thought, hey, maybe starting a company is a good thing to do.
That's got to be a relatable statement right there for this room. So on that line, can we talk a little bit about your career up into being an entrepreneur?
Sure. So I was a mechanical engineer by training, but then very quickly realized I wanted to get in more in the business world. So I went into a management consulting job, which is kind of designed to train young people coming in to learn more about business decisions, and work with companies on all sorts of competitor analysis and cost reduction kinds of strategies. And then I went to business school and got an MBA, and then went into high tech because I wanted to combine sort of engineering background with the business side. And my early years were in an operations environment, doing inventory management and supply chain kinds of logistics, quality control from an operations standpoint. And then I again got this itch to move into smaller environments. I was in Silicon Valley, and I actually probably moved smaller, but it didn't work out the way I expected. I ended up working at like 6 companies in 6 years, because they all sort of went belly up. This was the late 90s, early 2000s.
Sure.
And it was the B2B crash, and so I worked with some spectacular failures of companies and some others that didn't work out for whatever reason. But progressively getting smaller and smaller. But I realized there was risk to that, because many of these didn't make it. And then I tried to start my own company at one point, and that faltered too, right around the year 2000.
Was that in Silicon Valley, or was that here in
Silicon Valley? And after several spectacular failures, and realizing I was looking for a lower cost of living place to live and a better quality of life, and my wife had dropped out of the workforce at that point, and I decided maybe we'd move to Austin, and it's a better environment, I think, to raise a family, and certainly lower cost of living for buying a house and that sort of thing. So we moved here, and then another one of my jobs that I took to coming here kind of imploded after a year. The company was a B2B company, and just stock went from 60 to like 3, and they laid me off, and so I didn't know what I was going to do. I was new to Austin. Had again been through these 6 companies in 6 years. It was a frustrating time, but I teamed up with a couple of other guys that I met just socially, and they were looking to. One of them had sold a business, and they were working at Lucent, the Lucent spin-off of Gear at the time, and they were hardware guys, and we're talking about some business ideas, and we started. They thought they had a good product idea, but we're looking for kind of a business person who could do sales and finance and other things that they weren't able to do. So that's how we got started. Three real, I would say, hardcore electrical engineers and myself.
Awesome. So that's a question I get a lot. How do I find a co-founder? How did you put yourself in that opportunity? Was it literally just, these were friends of yours that you built over a couple of years? Did you go to certain events? Did you, was it networking through business? Kind of walk me through that, how you met your co-founders for.
Yeah, it was just luck. We happened to have children the same age, sons, and we were doing the YMCA Indian Guide to camping trips together. And it happened to be that I met one of the guys there, and we talked a lot about it, and he introduced me to a couple of his co-workers who were thinking about it too, and it just happened to be that there were 3 of them, and 2 of them were actually Indian guys. And so when I told my wife I met these guys at Indian Guides, she thought I met the Indian guys. But, it was Indian Guides, and that's how we met. We were camping, and we'd sit around the campfire, and we'd talk about business ideas and what we could do next. And I was out of a job, and they were their handcuffs were coming off because they had sold a company previously, and it was just random timing that I happened to, my first month moving to Austin, decided to go out camping with when my neighbor invited me, and then met this other fellow.
Yeah, opportunities everywhere.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, awesome. So that was something that I hadn't heard that story before, so I was really excited to hear about that. So you hear about startups trying to solve a pain. How was that pain maybe that you guys found? Was that experience through your co-founders? Like was this something that the solution that they were building, was it something that they had deep experience with and you were coming in to learn about that experience and share the solution that you were then selling to customers?
Yes, they were working in designing chipsets for gear for communication, for long haul fiber optic communications.
And Gear is the company.
Gear is the company, yeah. Which is kind of a long story. There used to be a startup company called Gear Up here in Austin. Lucent bought it, and then got rid of the name, and it was part of Lucent Microelectronics. And then they decided they actually liked the name, and so when they spun off as a separate company, their at this point larger microelectronics division, they called it a Gear, not a Gear Up. So the name sort of lived on. It was tied to it, but it wasn't the original Gear that was founded here in the 90s. In any case, they were making these chips, framer mapper chips for sending signals out on a fiber optic cable. And they realized they needed, for test purposes, to test their chipsets, they needed this equipment. They needed something that could inject impairments, delays, in order to validate their chip, if they had enough buffering in it, and if it was working at the right data rate and speed. And they needed to do that at high, at 1 gig and then 10 gig rates. And they looked around the market and they hadn't found anything. They hadn't really doing that. People were buying large spools of fiber, as big as you could make them. You get a 100-mile spool of fiber, and you say, oh, at least we get 100 miles. Yeah, well, what if you want 100 milliseconds, which might be more like 10,000 miles? Well, that was very hard to do. So they thought this is a need. They see their own company is willing to buy it. In fact, it was probably their manager who would be the buyer, and so that was kind of an unusual way to do it, but they knew right off the bat there was a customer there, and in fact I talked to their when they started working on this evenings, weekends, and thinking about it, talked to their boss and he was okay with the fact that they might develop this product or at least bring a team together and develop it, and basically indicated that they'd probably have a captive customer there who could buy it. So again, I was the daytime guy. They were working over there, and then they'd start working on the design at night, and I'd do all the daytime stuff, like incorporate the company and get the accounting software, and start working on talking to other customers about who would buy it and how much you could price a product for, and that's what we sort of worked in shifts like that to try to get this first product created. We each kicked in, 4 of us kicked in $5,000, and that was our seed money, and we sort of begged and borrowed equipment as we needed it, and bought stuff on Craigslist. It was used equipment because we needed something to test our early prototypes, and then we rent other stuff, and we got the first product out. It was a small version, and sure enough, that was our first customer, and was a Gear.
So bootstrapped to first product.
Bootstrapped our first product.
Bootstrapped
all the way.
Bootstrapped all the way.
All the way. So once we had the first product, of course, this team knew the other players. They were selling chips into hardware, into equipment systems in places like IBM and other networking companies. And so we went down the chain and followed to those guys. We didn't go to Gear's competitors per se. We went to Gear's customers, and we said, you're buying this chipset, you can't rely on their own testing, which is true. They have to test themselves. And this is what they use to test. And so you set up a same environment to make sure you can validate it. And that worked. And so we got several other customers.
Wow.
We just got lucky timing-wise that we got orders not too quickly that we needed to buy a bunch of inventory and didn't have the capital to do that, but not too slowly that we ran out of cash. So we got the money plowed it all back in. We were working without salaries for the first 15 months, and we used the revenues to buy parts and test equipment and continue to grow from there. And eventually we're bumming some office space. First we were in my garage, and then we were bumming some office space from a friend and who had an extra conference room that we could use, and then eventually we got our own space. So we continued to bootstrap those early days with our early product was not as big as our later product. It was something we were only selling for $6,000 or $7,000, so it maybe cost $1,000 of parts to build it, and we'd build small batches and build 10 at a time, and we were able to do it.
Yeah, reinvest the margin into the company. So in terms of that seed money that you guys put in, how long did it take you to go from zero to prototype? And was that prototype that you could take to customers and demo, or was that something that the customer would use? Or tell me a little bit about the timeline there, because I mean, in the story it sounds quick, but it couldn't have been that quick.
Yeah, it was a couple of months to get the, I had to go source some of the hardware, the enclosure, and these three fellows worked on the board design and started purchasing the components and the chips. And then, from there we had to do a board layout, and we had to test, and we had to wait for this. So there were lead times and all of those things. I think it was probably 3 or 4 months to get the first smaller product out.
Well, that even feels fast for
it was
hardware
pretty fast because the board was a relatively small, simple, and straightforward board, and 3 or 4 months. It was not a complicated first product. It was a lower data rate. It wasn't like our later stuff.
Sure.
It was much more complicated than
started small. It sounds like
started with lower data rates in the 100 meg. There were OC3, OC12 data rates, which are for long haul transport.
Sure.
But lower data rates than later.
And we love bootstrapping here in Austin. Josh is a bootstrapper. We see a lot of companies bootstrapping here in Austin. You don't see a lot of ideas on napkins getting funded. In Texas too. I mean, that's more of hyperbole than anything, but bootstrapping a hardware business is specifically tough.
Yeah, I know. I didn't realize at the time how hard that was, but looking back, I think having this early customer and then very quickly landing customer 2 and 3, but not like we need it tomorrow, more like we had another 3 months to ship that second wave, and then we had another 2 months for the next one, and so we could build 10 and then 10 and then 20 and then 30. I think the timing worked out well, but we were lucky in a way, because if somebody had come and said, I need 100 of these, we would have struggled, or if a bunch of time had gone by and we hadn't sold any, we would have struggled. We did go out and talk to venture capitalists, because we thought we were great stuff. We had a customer, and revenue. We were selling to big names, IBM, Lucent, and other people like that. And but we didn't get much traction with venture capitalists. I think we were viewed as a test tool company and kind of niche-y, and they're right. Network impairment emulators weren't, at that point, were maybe today still, were probably somewhere between $30 and $50 million total market. So it wasn't a huge space for that for impairment emulation. It was a little branch off of network testing, and and so they kind of turned us down, and we tried to paint a bigger story, like we actually believed we were going to go into the chip business, test tools, and then we'd get into all these specialized chips when we were making ASICs and FPGAs. We never did that, but at least we were painting a picture that was a broader.
Yeah.
But what we were doing then at that point was not big, and so then we stepped back and thought, well, everybody's supposed to raise money, and we can't raise money, so and then we realized maybe we don't need to raise money, because we can. We can work without salaries for a little while, and we can get a lot done with our rented office space and then our cheap office space. So up north on Breaker, we weren't burning a lot of cash. Our only costs were really buying the stuff and building it.
Okay.
And it was very high margin hardware. So I guess most hardware is, it was high margin stuff, specialized hardware. So we were making 80% gross margins or so, 75 or 80. So, it does seem unusual at the time. I think it was a combination of not being able to raise venture and being again, not an enormous market, small enough that we could grow at a regular pace.
Interesting.
And so we just kept going. We said, well, forget the fundraising. And in retrospect, I think that saved us a tremendous amount of time. I see entrepreneurs today, burn a lot of hours with investors, bankers, lawyers, accountants, all the stuff that you need to show investors, and it just. I feel bad for some of the guys that I meet even in mentoring years. I feel like that's all they've done for 6 months is raise money.
Oh yeah.
And all the things around it, all the paperwork around it. And I realized, having seen some of those other stories, that really freed up a lot of time. And it was my time because I was the business guy. So that's what I would have been doing.
Yeah.
Instead of signing up sales reps and helping to source some of the parts, and hiring people. So it was an enormous unburdening of overhead, not having to raise money.
Yeah.
Everything can be simpler. Your meetings can be simpler. Your financial reports can be simpler. Everything doesn't have to be as robust as if you're raising real money.
You're reporting to yourselves as well.
Right. And we were the board, we had no outsiders, and so that everything was very enabled us to just focus purely on the business, and that's what we did. So I think it was a blessing not having gotten rejected by venture capitalists.
Yeah.
Because it really enabled us to focus on what we were doing, to not burn a lot of time on other extraneous things, and when we focused, we really cut out all that. We didn't have extra money to burn too. So we had to get customers. It was all about, the stuff they later started writing about in books, the minimally viable product and build, measure, learn, and all the lean manufacturing and the lean company stuff. Felt like we were doing that in 2003, 4, 5, 6, because we had about a necessity. We didn't have a lot of frills. There was no going out and hiring a bunch of people. We had to do it ourselves until we really had enough revenue to support the position. So. There were things that we didn't do in much planning. There was no long range planning. We didn't have time for that. We had to sell. Everybody was either in engineering or selling in the early days. That was the business. There was no marketing. There was no finance because you're investors. So very basic spreadsheets, and that was it. So it was a blessing in disguise. I think that it really focused our energies on just what does the customer want, and let's build it and be very responsive to that. And if they ask for a new request or if something doesn't work, we turn on a dime and offer that. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah. So, working with customers, I'm curious, was it more about what they were asking for, or was it managing customer expectations when you were saying, customers weren't asking for, 100, they were only asking for what we could actually deliver on? Was that you guys specifically being strategic about customer conversations, or were they just not asking for?
They weren't. It was the nature of the business. We were selling into the test lab.
Okay.
So if we were in a production environment, they would be like, oh, I need 1,000 of these.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a production where they do a little bit of testing, so they need a couple of units to test, and then once they test, they finish their test, the product goes into production, and in test gear, sometimes it gets used for a month and then it doesn't get, or 3 months and it never gets used again, or only gets used annually for validations, depending on the type of test equipment. Or new products come out, they'll use newer stuff. But no, that's all they needed. It was a tool.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the strategies that you were deploying were later written about in Lean Startup and books like that. What were some of your favorite or some things that really truly helped you run lean that you like, that we haven't touched upon, maybe or some of the pieces that you'd really like to reinforce that helped you and the team really run lean, and especially as a hardware business?
Yeah, let's see. I think there were a bunch of things that we did. We were pretty, in retrospect, I guess, compared to the way I see a lot of startups spending money these days, we felt like we were cheap, the way we were running lean. So we would, for example, we would outsource things. We would, if we could, even some certain types of engineering work we could outsource. We would. We'd always try before we buy. We'd usually have somebody come in part-time first. So our first bookkeeper was just a sort of Monday morning kind of person, and then she enlarged eventually full-time. Our first HR person was just a one day a week kind of coming in to help out with, as we were getting bigger, to make sure we were following the right guidelines. And so we'd try to find contractors, consultants, people who could work part-time, or outsource something before we brought it in. So that was one way, I think, to not overextend ourselves. We were also very big on partnering with our sales channel. We found partners. We found either commissioned agents or sales reps or resellers. We didn't have our own direct sales force for several years. And in fact, we got one of the big vendors in the industry to take our product because it filled a need. They didn't have it. It was such a narrow niche. They didn't have a very good product there. So we signed a deal with them, and they were a reseller, and we gave away quite a bit of margin. I think they took like 40-45% in those early days. But things like that, where it was just like, I just can't afford to hire a sales guy. I can't afford to hire a full-time accountant, HR, marketing, and whatever. Now, I think while that was good, I think maybe we got a little bit too, what's the word? I guess we got a little bit too used to that, too comfortable with that. And there were certain things I look at later on when we really started growing that we maybe should have brought in-house sooner. HR was the one that I remember, because we did have, after we hit about 20, 25 people, we started having some people issues. And it took us a while. We were probably at 50 when we really hired this HR person full-time. And because when you're 50, you have to start publishing things on your walls, that you have to post the minimum wage and OSHA requirements and stuff.
Sure.
That when you're 50, so I knew that, but in retrospect, I should have brought that person in sooner, because we had some bubbling up cancers in the company that weren't doing well. Some of them were people who, as we grew, weren't ready for bigger responsibilities. Some were just bad apples to begin with, and
Sure.
and I think we were so much in this mindset that, oh my gosh, we're not going to bring in an HR person full time until the need is so much, we're burning, with the requirement of having somebody in that role. And it probably would have been better to get in front of it a little bit more.
Sure.
So when you're not, the fire's just smoldering way up here, and the HR person has to come in and try to fix these conflicts and these issues that are developing. So we were just so much in that mindset that you don't hire until you're doing like 3 jobs, and you're like, okay, let me hire someone, and we'll each do 1.5 jobs.
Yeah.
And again, that's not always the smartest thing. You have to be able to just go ahead when you have the cash in the bank and you can afford it.
Sure.
And do it, because those support areas are important.
Yeah.
We just, in the early days, there was no support, there was no long-term planning, there was no, I always thought that was sort of a myth, that you have to know exactly where you're headed before you leave. And we didn't really know all the time where we were headed. We were just building and selling, and implementing as fast as we can. I do think a pretty good plan implemented quickly is better than a great plan, implemented poorly or slowly.
Sure.
And we were always of that mindset. And part of that came from not having raised money. We just didn't have the freedom to do things that we would have had if we had more money to throw at problems.
Absolutely. And there was something interesting that you said there was, some of the people problem, like something that I always like to ask entrepreneurs who've scaled businesses up to like 25, 50 plus people. How do you maintain that culture? How do you make sure that it's a company that you're proud of, that everybody's energized by, I guess maybe what you're energized by, or how do you see that? Is that a strategy that what's your best way to handle culture as you continue to grow a business?
It's tough, it's for culture, especially for people like us. We were 3 probably left-brain founders, 3 engineers, and had an engineering background too. And I think it's something that we always thought, well, that's so easy. How hard can that be to create a good culture? And it's so simple, but it's hard. At the same time, it's hard to do that. It's, on the one hand, there's no rocket science about it. It's everyday stuff. It's listening to people and treating them with respect, and realizing that what motivates people, and it's not about just making money. It's about the sense of doing something fulfilling, and the sense of progress, that I'm making progress towards something. I'm not working on something that gets shuttered, and then some other project that gets backburnered, and I think that kind of stuff, particularly in the engineering world, gets very frustrating for people. So I think having the sense that you're moving in a forward direction and making progress, and the stuff you're doing is meaningful, and then fulfilling because you always see it fruition, is little things like that. So I don't think there's any sort of wow factor behind it. It's just it's hard to do on a regular basis, and listening to people and communicating a lot as much as you can, being open. I think too many management teams, they don't tell people what's going on. And we always did. We always told people, if we were we brought in some outside board members, we told people we were going to do that. We told people why we weren't raising money, and how we thought we could bootstrap along without money. And we were pretty open about most of those strategic things.
Was there pushback on some of that stuff?
Yeah, there were people who saw things differently. Sure, I wanted to go big. Even up to the day we sold the company, there were people who thought, "Wow, why are we selling? Why don't we?" So the short story is, by 2008, we started a new product that was in a bigger space, We were doing pretty well in that niche space, but we were a $10 million company, and we didn't think our growth was going to be playing in the $30 or $40 million space. Then we launched into something today they call a network packet broker. It was using a similar type of filtering technology, but more in a deployed live network, not in a test lab. So it's a much bigger market, probably a $400 or $500 million market. And that, we launched the product in 2008, that grew, so we had both product lines growing. That newer one actually overtook the other one, and when we sold in 2012, it was the lead revenue generator, and we were up to 170 people, and we sold for $154 million. And, so we had a lot of staff issues. We grew very fast the last few years with that new product line. So by the time we hit 50, it just kind of went up quickly from there. And so, yeah, I think your question about hiring people and growing people, again, like I said, I was always a believer early on that, organization, and I still believe this, there's a lot of different organizations that can get you to your goal. You don't have to do things a certain way. And some people disagree with me. But when you get bigger, organization does, it starts mattering more and more. When we were 20, 30, 40 people, I don't think. Yeah, whether or not you call someone a product manager or product marketing, and if he does product management and product marketing, some people get all caught up in real strict definitions of that, and who reports into, who does product management report to engineering as a report to, and I think there are lots of ways to do that. And some of it depended on the type of the person and their skill level and how much they could handle, and I just don't think there's any one way to build an organization. But when you're 100 people, 150 people, yeah, that kind of stuff does start mattering more. And that's when that's when I think personally got a lot harder, because that stuff was less enjoyable for me.
Sure.
The organizational stuff and managing more people types of questions and career development and people issues and sometimes conflicts, and that I think is harder stuff. And that's when we had a really good HR person, and we brought in. We eventually brought in one of our outside board members. We brought in 2 outside board members, and then 3 years later, one of those guys, we made him the CEO. So real strong organizational, bigger company person, strong HR person, and we had one other senior VP we brought in who, again, had managed larger teams and done bigger developments. Because again, we were a small company.
Yeah.
Guys, we knew how to turn stuff around quickly and not deal with a lot of process. But when we got up to that size, we needed more. We needed some process.
Absolutely.
So
walk me through that decision of, bringing on an outside board member and then deciding that the founders are no longer going to be the CEO. I mean, I've seen that a couple times, actually pretty recently as well here at Capital Factory, with an accelerator company that met a mentor that jumped on as CEO. But I mean, what does that decision look like?
Yeah, that's hard. I think the outside board members one is pretty easy, because when it was just insiders and never having taken outside capital, we never had outsiders. We realized that, and gotten advice from people, that's not smart. You should have some outside board members from other industries, because they can look at it with fresh eyes. And I think we started feeling that way too. Not only, well, a couple of things happened. Not only that we had been so absorbed in it, heads down for so long, that it was hard for us to really maybe be objective about things. We also had one of the 4 founders leave in 2008, because again, he wanted to have a certain role, and we thought it wasn't that he wasn't big enough to manage a larger engineering team, and so he left, and that created a little bit of an issue too, because we needed to have some validation. We just wanted to be more careful about, hey, how much are we paying ourselves? How much additional stock are we getting now that we're still here and he's gone? Because we knew he's a major shareholder, he's going to question those things, and we just wanted to have some validation of that. And so that's why we brought 2 outside board members in, so that the CEO's comp is legitimate, and you've got somebody validating it. So there were some issues like that too, from a governance standpoint, that were important. Now, in terms of making that one of those guys the CEO, I think that was always in the back of our head, because none of us felt like we were, large company. None of us had been CEOs before, and we never. I mean, the largest team I ever managed was probably a team of 20, 25 people, and we realized, wow, we haven't really done that. There's a lot more organizationally that is needed.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in the back of our head when we brought the board members in that they could help us with that, and fortunately one of them was willing to come in and do it. And first was actually like co-CEO for 6 months, and then
Sure.
became CEO, because it's a big risk. It's
Oh,
huge.
yeah.
It's a huge risk if that doesn't work out, if that doesn't click. But fortunately, we had 2 years or so of him on the board and hearing some of his thinking, and I think it was a two-way street. I think we learned a lot from him, and he learned a lot from us, because he was a big company guy.
Mm.
I think there were certain things about this lean stuff where he would say, "Oh, how come you're not doing that?" And I have to explain it. We just don't have the resources to do all those things you can do at a big company.
Yeah, not a big budget.
Yeah, why don't you have a stronger person doing sales in Mexico? Well, because sales in Mexico are so small. I got all these other fires to fight, and I think those kinds of things. We're in a bigger company. There's more unlimited resources. You just you do sales. You try to focus on all these countries, and we couldn't do that. So anyway, I think we gelled as time went on, and had we not, we would have kept looking, because it's a bigger risk in pulling somebody into the role that you're not comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew at the time that was a big risk, but fortunately it worked out. We tried to minimize the risk by getting to know each other as
Mm-hmm.
well as we possibly could.
Yeah, absolutely. So an overarching strategy that I kind of saw in your business, and whether this was intentional or not from the beginning, is starting out with a super niche product, but then expanding into a much larger market to really grow the company and grow at a much more rapid pace. Is that something that you necessarily advise startups today to do, or is that just something that kind of happened because of the pain you were solving initially, and then kind of went from there? I mean, what are your thoughts on companies maybe trying that strategy today?
I think it's a good strategy, the sort of the bowling alley approach, where you try to get a foothold, especially with large accounts, in one area that's a weak spot. It's a soft underbelly of the industry where other people aren't taking it seriously because it's not the big player, it's the smaller niche market. Or aren't doing a very good job at it, and you can do a better job. So I think that's a good way to do it. I think even more important than that, though, is getting a customer as quickly as you can. I mean, we had a golden opportunity that we had a customer in waiting basically for our product, and they bought it as soon as we had it. But if you can get your product in a customer's hands, even if they're not paying you, from day one on it, that I think is key, because then you're going to learn. You're not building what you think is important. You're going to really you're going to listen to what they say, and you're going to add the next 5 features that they want, and then when you have 2 or 3 or 4 of those customers, then you're adding the best 5 features that are coming from all of them. Mm-hmm. And that's really, to me, that's really important. Now that doesn't always fit with every model. I guess with certain, with certain consumer companies, you have to be ready to scale much more quickly. Mm-hmm. You can't just. But we were in a narrower niche, and I know that's not always going to be possible. But yeah, I think getting that minimally viable product in a customer's hands and learning from it is really important. Mm-hmm. It's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Let's see. It's 5:15 now. I'm kind of open to opening up to the rest of everybody else about questions, and kind of just asking mainly Kevin. I don't know how helpful I'd be here up here sitting, but yeah, you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah. What was the difference between your first product and your second one? I fully understood how the first one worked. I'm very curious about what was the differences that made it so much better than the first one.
The second product?
Yeah.
Yeah, the second product took that same, the first product was able to do a lot of filtering and then impairing a signal. So we could say, oh, just drop 1 out of every 10 VoIP packets that you see or something. So we had that full line rate, heavy duty filtering going on from an impairment standpoint. And then we took it into the live network and said, now we're going to go into the monitoring world. So this box would sit as a piece of plumbing at your ingress and egress points of your network, and it would filter out packets and say, just take all your VoIP packets and send them over here to this monitoring tool. And take all your email traffic and send it to this monitoring tool. Yeah. Or for security purposes, for any kind of monitoring, data collection, monitoring, forensics. So we were the filtering and the aggregation device that had some of the same core technology behind it, but it was now for monitoring purposes. So it was more, had to sit in a live network, maybe had to have a backup power supply so it would never go down.
So the
And then
second product was a tool, or I guess the second product was a tool for the tool.
Tool for the tool, yeah. It was a tool aggregator. It was a packet broker for tools. So we weren't the monitoring device, but we were the ones sending just the selected packets the monitoring device wanted to see to the monitoring device.
Nice.
Yeah, if you get something weird, if all of a sudden you get a lot of packets, send all of them for the next hour, and we're gonna chew through them and see if anything weird's going on.
So that kind of evolved from taking everyone's opinions of all the ones that you sold.
Right, right. And that got into a bigger market because it was a broader market. And some of these tools just couldn't process that quickly.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'd have to send, to 10 different tools so they could each keep up with it. And we could do that, boom, 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 boom. So it was aggregation, it was filtering, it was sometimes duplicating. Sometimes both tools would want a certain packet. And so it's okay, duplicate it, we'll duplicate it, we'll send it to both. Yeah, it was a little more risky because it was live network. You had to be a little more certification based. You had to make sure it wasn't, in the test lab, even if you don't even have your certifications, people they'll dabble with it. It's sort of like a trial box, in a lot of labs, even big companies. But putting it out there on the network, you better be certified. You got to work, not catch fire and that sort of thing.
How did you protect your IP before you went to the big companies? Did y'all protect it, or?
We did. We spent some money even early on patent filings, and we eventually got a few. We got several. I think we were somewhere in the between 10 and 20 by the end of the day in terms of patents. So we did file, but I don't know. The guys I worked with never put a lot of faith in that. I always kind of thought you should do that, but somebody could still knock off your product if you wanted to. And I think partly is because we were a niche player that was unlikely, because we worried a little bit about that in Asia, you ship your product. But I think the guys in China would rather knock off a Cisco router where there's 10 million of them sold a year than a NUI network emulator where there's sold a few. So I think the amount of time they put into it, it wasn't a big enough market to knock it off. So I think that helped us. And then I think the other thing is, we just always believe that we've got to, implement changes and improvements faster than everybody else. So even if somebody knocked off our product, we'd be adding new features and adding this and that. It gets pretty fancy pretty fast. You get into all sorts of statistics when you want to start doing different types of ratios on how many packets you want to air, and do you do it in a do you do it one every 10th packet, or do you do a Gaussian distribution or Poisson distribution? I mean, you could add all this sort of intellectual property behind it too, that gives you fancy graphs and charts, and it was all in the software, in the code. So we always tried to keep those things up. So even if somebody had a basic product, we'd be way ahead by the time they launched.
You just conquered my biggest fear. 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Terrified to tell anyone about it.
Someone else, I know, we worried a little bit about that too, because we thought other people could do it, but I think the combination of being in a niche market and being, trying to continually adapt to new features. And by the time we got in the second product, that packet broker stuff, there were a half dozen competitors, so there were a lot of people doing that. And they knocked off some of our marketing materials, but I don't think anybody really copied our code, so to speak. I did see some of our marketing pictures on some of their sites, but that's not so important. They figured out how to do it.
How long did you stay after the acquisition, and what was that transition like? The period of time. How long did it take from the time they gave you the LOI until you kind of started figuring it out, and then it happened, and then you stayed X amount of time?
And did you have handcuffs? Or?
Yeah. No, we kind of did a handshake that we'd stay a year. But it wasn't, so the CEO of the acquiring company asked us if we'd stay a year. And it turned out I sort of wanted to stay because I think there were all these sort of, you get in bigger companies, it's political, and you get in these meetings and somebody would raise a topic of taking our sales team and merging it in with the rest of the company. And I was like, we don't want that because our product is so different than what they're selling. So it almost became this battle for me to kind of keep our sales force separate as a division. And so I spent the first year kind of fighting for that, to keep them, and it worked. It worked up until the time I left, and then in that year after I left, it all got muddled in together. And partly our sales guys didn't want to do it. They didn't want to be selling these slow growth products. They wanted to sell our cool stuff, but other people wanted to get their hands on it. And I was also worried that it wasn't as good for the customers because our guys really knew our product. And once you get a 10 times bigger sales force, they don't know it as well. And
Didn't they have an acquisition right after they acquired you two themselves?
They did,
or something?
yeah.
So were you there through that?
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's what I first worked on, just keeping our team, keeping our team empowered to sell our stuff. And I think that worked pretty well. And then I worked on their acquisition team. So they bought another company here in Austin called Breaking Point. Same summer they bought us.
Yeah.
And then a year later, we bought a company on the West Coast called NetOptics, which made similar types of products. And all three of those were in the same division, kind of, so to speak. And I worked on that acquisition. So I guess the first year was more of a mission of mine to keep our team engaged and relevant and selling what they wanted to be selling. The second year was more like, oh, this is kind of fun. I get to go out and learn about other small competitors and companies and help work on the acquisition team with the CEO. That was kind of fun. But then 2 years gone by, and I realized, I don't have a place here anymore. Really, they have their own sales team, and we went through all the standard stuff. I thought I had hired some pretty high quality sales directors and VPs, and when they were the acquirer, and I thought that all my guys got kind of slotted down a little lower level, one level below what they should have been doing, and they were working for somebody else who should have been the other way around. That's what happens when you're the buyer, I guess. Those guys seem to get the prime jobs. So I was a little frustrated by that. And then for me, there just wasn't a role.
When did Keysight come in?
Oh, then Keysight came and bought. This was probably 2 years after I left. I stayed for 2 years,
okay.
and it was at least, it was 3 years after that.
Okay.
So Keysight bought all of Ixia, so now it's all, our stuff is under the umbrella of Keysight, which was the original HP test and measurement stuff. The HP in the garage, that's now Keysight. HP is printers and medical stuff. Keysight is their oscilloscopes and test equipment. That's where we are now. That's where we fall.
So what was, sorry, I kind of cut to the time and wanted to open it up, but that brings up other good questions about what was it like leading up to the acquisition?
Oh, that was quite an ordeal. That was quite an ordeal. We had through a mutual connection in the industry, because Ixia was in the industry that we played in. We had actually met about a year beforehand, the CEO, through a mutual friend, and just kind of got to know each other a little bit and didn't talk about acquisitions. But
were you looking?
we were not actively, but when we heard through our mutual friend that they were interested in meeting with us and learning a little bit about our business, we thought, well, it's a good thing to at least meet with them, because you don't know, they might go buy somebody else, because I said we had 6 competitors at that point, or they might do it themselves. So I thought we better at least talk. And we went and talked, and it struck me that they probably were sniffing around.
Mm-hmm.
So no, we weren't really interested, but we thought, I don't want to just not engage in a conversation. And then when we engaged in a conversation, we realized they're sniffing around. So then we did go get a small banker, to start putting a pitch sheet together, because we figured we can't just, they're gonna probably make an offer at some point. They're asking us a lot of questions. And I thought, I don't want to just have one person on the hook. And so we got a banker, and he started sending out to people we had approved of. Mm-hmm. And then we got, and the other banker didn't really find anybody else, so we were back talking to these guys, and sure enough, they made an offer. But then they had a very difficult to deal with attorney, in-house attorney.
Surprising.
And he was just a total, he was just a jerk. I don't know. Even people in his company would say bad things about him.
Wow. And
we fell apart over just some of the way he was treating us and some of the things he was doing, and we thought, no, we let the quiet period expire, and then we told him we didn't want to work with him anymore. And sure enough, another company came in, which is a big industrial company, and made an offer. It was higher, and we thought, oh great, this worked out. And then that company took us through a quiet period of 2 months, and they, at the 11th hour, pulled the plug and said, no, we see some things here we don't like it. So then we really panicked, and we're like, wow. But then the first company actually came back, and we told them we just didn't want to work with that attorney anymore.
Yeah.
They came back at an even higher price, because at that point more months had gone by. So it was it was like one company was interested, and then we weren't interested in them, and then another company was interested, and we were very interested, and then they backed away at the end, and then the first company came back in. It was a crazy, probably 9-month period.
Yeah.
And that, like what I avoided in the early days of raising money, that's what it's like. It's all consuming. It's hard to run the business while you're doing that stuff, because you're in meetings all the time, you're pitching and you're pulling data, and it's very hard to go through and keep the business running. I found it probably one of the most stressful times, partly because we were getting bounced around by 2 different potential acquirers. And I think that was a little bit unusual. Some acquisitions worked more smoothly, but ours was rough.
Wow.
Yeah, it was tricky. A lot of negotiation, a lot of nitty-gritty stuff, a lot of lawyers arguing with each other in rooms.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I didn't know it was going to be that hard, but it took a lot out of us, I think. To the point where afterwards we had to kind of go out and have some dinners together with them, just to kind of smooth over things.
Wow.
The CEO would bring us little gifts, to try to get back on our good side, because he realized we had to be on the same team now, and it was a little acrimonious.
Yeah.
Going through the process. I think, I don't think we were negotiating any different than other people. It was just, for whatever reason, there were a lot of little nitpicks. And it was their style.
Were you their first acquisition, or was there some acquisitions before?
I think there had been maybe one earlier, but much smaller. Yeah, so I think that was part of it. They weren't very adept at it.
Sure.
And and again, part of it was some of the personalities, and some of it is some of the law firms that you hire. And if the law firms are more like, they like to go at each other, and they argue more, and that creates more tension.
Sure. Awesome. I'm gonna open it back up. Go, and then back to you.
Can you quickly pinpoint like highest of the high and the lowest of the low in the whole process?
Oh, wow.
Low moment and the high moment.
That's a good question.
Highest of the high and lowest of the low.
Make a note of that for next time.
Wow, that's a good one. What was the highest of the high? There were so many, because there are lots of highs and lows for sure. I think it was the high point was probably realizing toward the end that we had really, because I think it got a little bit sad that we were kind of selling and moving on, and it was pretty clear we'd grown so quickly toward the end. We were in a bigger space, and it just wasn't a small company anymore. It was taking off, and we needed bigger sources of sales teams and relationships, and we were going to be able to have a bigger impact being part of a larger company. But I think realizing at that point that the high point was realizing that we had created something really special, and I didn't really, you go through this day to day culturally, and it doesn't seem like it seems like you're just doing your job, and everybody's coming to work, and you're doing taking time out for some special things, or recognizing people, or whatever, sales trips, or whatever you're doing. But I think it was in retrospect that some of the comments that we got from people at that point were that, wow, this was really like a family. This was a special place, and we're gonna miss that. That to me was the high point, to realize, wow, looking back, it had been a special place. People felt like they were working on meaningful stuff, and it was always that sense of growth, and I think the teams knew each other. We were all here in Austin except for sales teams, so we weren't a scattered company. So we had we all worked in the office. We did very little, other than one engineer in Dallas worked at home, but everybody else worked in the office. And so I think we created a real positive environment, that people would look back on and say, wow, that was really special. And in my whole career, I haven't been any place quite like that, where people cared for each other, and it was a real family. And that to me was the high point, I think, is that we did create something special without really knowing we were doing that at the time, just trying to treat people like people, you know, and hire people who were good managers and were nice to each other. But I guess in today's world, that stands out. If you do that for enough years, it stands out and it becomes a special place. The low. You know, we had a couple of those. We had, as I mentioned, we had one founder leave. We had one our head of sales leave for some personal issues. Those were low points. I'm trying to think, but maybe what I just described, going through the selling of the company, might have been the low, because not only are you dealing with you know, people that it can be very difficult, and then knowing that they're going to be your driving the ship, you know, and that fear of like, are these guys really just so different than us that they're going to make our life miserable, and our life of all these people that we hired miserable? Because I see some of the interactions and that was a little bit overblown, because the interactions it can get tense during the negotiation because there's too many lawyers, but it's not the way that generally day to day went, but still there was that overriding fear. This is a miserable experience. We're arguing about a lot of things. It may not work out, and then if it does work out, we're working for these people, and we got to deal with them day to day. And what does that, you know, what does that mean? So that was and not to mention, are we doing the right thing by selling the company? Are we doing the right thing by breaking up this family and throwing it to the wind? And, you know, because you never know what's going to happen. That I think was the low point, just having to go through that whole process.
After you...
We're going to jump over here first, if
Oh,
that's all right.
go
Here,
ahead.
just stand up.
Knowing that you were the first to come up with the product, how did you go about valuing that product, especially when selling it to any type of companies? Like, how did you come up with that number of value?
Yeah, we kind of guesswork, really, because I didn't know what it should cost. I guess came at it from a couple ways. One is you kind of knew what it cost to build it, so we knew maybe building it for $1,500, and we knew margins. You know, a lot of margins in hardware, and you know, you look at Cisco making switches or whatever, other test equipment. It's probably 75%. So, you know, maybe we $8,000 that way. But also, when you're building small quantities, you know, prices can be a little artificially high. So you had to take that into consideration. I think the other thing was just, you know, a little bit looking at other things that were out there in a similar way, you know, and saying, yeah, I think I know what a 24-port switch costs, and so I know this has a couple of switches and it's a piece of test gear. But we honestly probably underpriced it because we wanted to make sure people bought and it wasn't an issue, and we wanted to make sure it was under, you know, it was under 10 grand. Nobody had to get any sort of capital approvals to buy it. A lab manager could buy it. But honestly, it was a little bit of guessing coming in with the first price. We were more just wanted to get it in people's hands, and then we always thought we can always add stuff to it, add extra software features, and we could charge for those. You know, you want extra delay, we could put more memory in, we'll charge more for that. So we didn't worry too much about it. We just wanted to get some revenue in the door and come in with something that was fair.
Okay. And then now that it's all said and done, and that's done, the company's all sold, what are you doing like now? Are you just mentoring here? Are you working on another project? Or?
Yeah, I'm mentoring here, and I'm working with as an advisor with several startups. I got like 4 that I work with pretty regularly, weekly, and help out mostly with strategy and sales types of issues. So it gives me some variety and some equity, and I also do some angel investing in companies too.
I might be number 5.
All right. Appreciate that. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I sold a company once, and after I started with the company and I stayed on, I had earnouts and stuff like that. Was there just like a slice and it's like, okay, all the finance was done, there was nothing on you obligation-wise going forward, you were an employee, or did you have that kind of relationship where you still had to, you know, finish up something?
Did have to. We sold in June. I definitely was clear that I was gonna manage our own, through the end of the year, our sales team and our revenue number that we were expected to hit, but there was no earnout.
That's what I was
We
wondering.
pushed back on that
Yeah.
and didn't wanna do that, cause I think that came up a couple of times, and my point on earnouts is very, very hard. You know, I'm clearly working for somebody different. I'm not working for RC. I'm working for someone new, and so you just don't know what kind of resources you're gonna have, what changes are gonna be made, and you know, I did say, yeah, we're on target to hit this number if we keep things the way they're going, and they wanted me to keep doing that. And then start January 1st, everything kind of started reporting elsewhere. I wasn't running the sales team anymore.
Got it.
But no earnout. We had some escrow, so they take, what did they take, 5% of the
First
sale
year or
price? They took a percent of the sale price. I think it was 5%. They put it in an escrow account, and they just want to make sure there's no tax liability, and there's no other stuff like that. And a few things, you know, the accountants just have to go through and make sure at the end of the year, you know, yeah, you didn't fail to pay some state taxes somewhere, and so we had to go through some of that. But we got that money all back with a very small amount, I think, for some of these local state tax obligations, because some states are very aggressive. They come after you if you ever sold anything in their state. And we kind of thought, well, the odds of getting caught are, you know, are pretty slim, but you know, they're vague, and so we went back and paid some of those obligations in the state, because some sales rep that we had a contract with traveled through a state on a regular basis, and so therefore we had nexus, and we interpreted that to not be nexus, but
Whoa.
but they would say, no, you probably, to be safe, you probably should pay Illinois, you know. Okay, let's pay Illinois. So that came out of the escrow
Got it.
bucket, but yeah, so I was a little worried about that, because that didn't come
A few
from the
lessons to
year.
be learned from those things.
Oh,
Yeah.
Awesome.
Some questions back there?
In the yellow jacket, then we'll go to the back left.
Yeah, you mentioned that you hired this first salesperson 2 years into your venture. Do you think that your funding situation, as in bootstrapping, led you to maybe perhaps not be that concerned about growing faster?
You know, I think possibly. I think there were a couple of points, but I don't think it was early on. I think there were a couple points in the company's life that where we could have raised money and grown faster, and it would have speeded us up. Because it was 10 years, right, before we sold, 9.5 years. But picking those times at that moment would have been hard to do. Because in early years, I don't think that first product we were selling, the market was very big for. We had to get the higher speed products built, and they took longer. They took a year to build the two different versions, 2 and 3 of our product. And then I think if we had hired sales ahead of that, it wouldn't have been a smart idea. So I think we needed to have the bigger products to fit the broader audience, the Ethernet product and the 10 gig product and the 1 gig product. Because at first we were very narrow in the application of what we were doing for impairment. We needed impairments across Ethernet, 1 gig and 10 gig. So I think early on, no, I don't think it would have sped us up. But there were a few times in the product's life, if I had picked the right time, right when we maybe launched that third product, we could have raised some money and moved faster than we did, and maybe sped things up. But I think the risk would have been you raise money at the wrong time, and then you're doing something unnatural, driving towards a cliff to try to build a whole bunch of these, you know, and try to sell them. And there wasn't as much a market for those first products. And so I think it's more likely we would have raised money and then been driven towards something that just wasn't there. That's what I was scared of.
Thank you for your story. I enjoy the fact you were talking about sales and sales as a funding mechanism and hustling. And can you talk a little bit about the environment now is in startup world is build, get funded, then think about how you're going to sell it. And I think you were talking about the value of the sales being integrated early on.
Yes.
And I'm a salesman, so
Yes.
but I talk to people all the time. It's amazing how there's like, well, I'll sell it later. I'm like, well, dude, if you
Right.
sell it later, you might not be here later. So I enjoyed that part of your story, but I just wanted to have a little dialogue about the value of sales and how we can move it from fourth position to second position and use it as a self-funding as well as a verification
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
ideation, because you get the idea,
Right.
you know, and then people go out and get money or look for money. They don't get money, they look for money, and spend so much time asking for money around our community, you know.
Right.
I'm like, dude, that's a nice idea, but how are you gonna sell it?
I know.
So, well, we'll deal with it later. That's like getting married and figure out how you're gonna stay married.
Right, right. No, I think you're right. I don't, maybe what we did was, it feels unusual compared to, having a first customer, knowing that you could build it for somebody and they were gonna buy it. And then, by the way, calling some other people and indicating there was interest in their, I remember doing that, even before I decided I was gonna join these guys full time, doing that due diligence, was calling some of these names and saying, yeah, that would be a good product if you could do that, we'd buy that.
Were they cold, the calls? I mean, were they also cold? Like, hey,
No, these were calls of people in the business, in the industry that I kind of knew or that they hooked me up with.
Like LinkedIn second, LinkedIn.
Yeah,
third?
stuff like that. So I think I think it's important, and I agree with you. I think you need to know who's gonna buy your product before you create it and raise a bunch of money and hope somebody. Now there may be certain industries that are different. Maybe some of the social media stuff or something. I don't know. Areas I don't know.
It all comes down to selling,
But
I
you
mean,
gotta.
at some point,
We were all salesmen, the three founders and myself. Were all any engineer we hired was a salesperson. Would go into sales meetings, and I bristled much later when we started getting into more of this organizational stuff. And one of the guy we brought in is one of our outside hires, the senior VP, which was a good organizational guy, but he was from big companies. I bristled when he would not allow engineers to talk to customers. It's like, no, that's what product management is for. And I was like, what are you kidding me? We always had engineers go out and talk to customers. The customers love that because we were selling to the nerds at the customers, the IT guys or the lab guys, and they love talking to engineers. And to him, that was just a foreign concept. Like, oh my God, you can't take an engineer away from his desk for 10 minutes. The product's going to be late. I mean, and I thought, no, that's not the way. Everybody's got to treat a little bit of their job as sales. Everybody needs to hear what the customer's saying. And understand, hear it firsthand, and be able to ask a question and learn about what features are important and why they're important. So, gosh, I thought that was what we did early on. I think was invaluable. It was the right track. Get everybody involved in meeting customers, not just specific people who then have to filter it back to the engineers, not just a sales engineer or a product manager. So, no, I think everybody should be in front of a customer. I told my oldest son just graduated college. I said, go carry a bag, be a sales guy. That's where you learn. That's those are noble jobs. I think that's where you really understand what customers are looking for, and there's nothing quite like it. And I think people forget that in a lot of startups today. You're right. They think it's an afterthought, or it'll happen later, and it's part of a. I don't know. People just think maybe too organizationally. I guess too functionally, maybe.
I think
There's sales and there's marketing and there's engineering, and it's more messy. It's more messy than that. In a startup, it's more overlapping. It's more messy. Everybody's kind of doing a little bit of selling, I think.
Like a toddler.
Yeah, yeah. It's not so clear. It's not so cut and dry. And if problems, and same with support problems. There may only be one guy who can solve it. It's your head engineer, or your CTO, or your CEO in our case, sometimes. And so that's the way it needs to get done.
I got something
Yeah.
out of that.
All right.
Implement.
Yeah.
It's kind of looking at each function and then maybe assigning some type of sales mindset to it.
Right. Give everybody an opportunity to do that. I mean, there are companies out there who will have everybody will do a stint in their on the phone and customer support, or just to hear customers, hear their frustrations, engage in the dialogues, know what they like and what they don't like.
Pain point.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, it's that's so valuable. Yeah. That's really
Appreciate
valuable.
it. Time well spent. I can't reach. For me.
Oh, sure, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
At what point did you realize, like, this is it, like, this is gonna work, this is
I remember when we were, only like a year and a half into it, that I sat around with a couple of the other founders and we said, because at that point I think we were just, it was kind of an experiment. I mentioned the evenings and weekends, and my 3 other partners not even quitting their jobs until we knew we had that first product built. So we were pretty conservative. They didn't want to just hop ship. They said, I can do this at night. Why not quit my day job? And they did, and they quit, and then we were still working without salary. And it's at one point, I think, when we started selling, and at that point had some profits to pay ourselves, and I think we back paid like 3 months, so we only worked for like a year without pay. But I remember sitting around looking at each other saying, well, this actually is, I think it's gonna work, and that was because at that point it had been a little like an experiment. We weren't getting paid, and we were selling a few, but we don't know if we were gonna be able to develop the next generation product, which really could bring in some revenue. And then when we had that working, and we had some orders starting to come in, and I remember the first day when we were actually had two pre-sales demos in the same day, and I thought, wow, that's great, because we were doing like one a week if we were lucky. And then we had to divide up. 2 people had to go over here on this phone call, and 2 people had to go, on a plane or wherever we were going to the other one. And I was like, wow, this is really, we're really meeting with customers, and we're getting orders. And that's when, so it was early on, a year and a half in, we thought this is really going to work. This is a real company. So it wasn't until much later we thought, wow, this could be a real creator of wealth, and and it could be build a lot of people. It just happened. It happened so steadily and slowly over time that I never felt like we were on a real rocket ship.
Yeah.
It was just it was that early hurdle that would really hit me the most. Like, wow, we really have a business here.
Yeah.
We can start paying salaries. We can hire some more people, hire some engineers.
Have you thought about what that product's gonna evolve into later on in life?
The current product
Yeah.
that we make? Well, the space has evolved quite a bit because of the web services, the hosted world. So people aren't doing as much monitoring of their own networks anymore. You just kind of turn it over to AWS or Azure. And so that's changed the nature of this. There are still, I think the people still buying these kinds of products tend to be very large, like banks, people who just have to control their own network.
Yeah.
But a lot of the average companies we sold to, I think now the monitoring game is outsourced to AWS. So you're selling to the AWS. So it's virtualized or outsourced. So it's changed quite a bit. And we started to see the beginnings of that, writing on the wall, and thought this whole market may go virtual, and then you're not monitoring individual lines of traffic coming in to each of your servers. And so we were worried about that, and as it was, we were probably 2 or 3 years before. We could have kept growing, but eventually it did slow down.
Yeah.
That test and monitoring space, I think, did slow down and got more centralized into these gigantic hosting services.
If you had to guess, how much of a change do you think your product made to the industry as is? Now that it's all said and done.
Oh, how much change we made?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were hard to say. In the first product line that we did, I think we became kind of a standard for that impairment emulation. I do. I think we were the standard, and I think people are still using some of those products we built 10 years ago today. But again, that's a small market.
Yeah.
In the bigger market, there was already one player in there when we came in, and I said there were probably half dozen within less than a year. That bigger player in the packet brokering space was Gigamon, and they eventually IPO'd. We never caught them. We were probably 60% the size of them when we sold our business, and they kept growing faster, and then we were growing as well, but we never grew as fast as we did. So no, we weren't I think we pushed them and made them better and stronger, and they were a public company eventually worth over $1 billion. And then they came back down a little bit, but they were the #1 player, and there were several others in there as well. I think we were #2. So yeah, we pushed that industry along, but we never led it. We were not the defining company in that space.
Yeah.
we were a good player. We had some good market share. And I think we gave them a run for their money. But we never dominated where I did. I thought we had the best product in that that smaller niche that we were in. When we got into the bigger dance floor, it was more crowded, and we were one of a few.
Yeah.
And that small dance floor, I think we were almost like the household name, in the test labs.
That's the goal.
Yeah, for those guys. Yes.
Still got a couple minutes. Does anybody have any other questions?
Your previous experiences at startups, you mentioned you were at a number of ones, you founded a company. Did any of those particular experiences did you feel like they benefited you when you took this role?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I had bounced around a bit in a couple of different industries. Yeah, so I think so. I think I learned something from all of them. Even the unsuccessful startup, I learned some hard lessons in I think what the big ones were. Certainly worked for one company that we got acquired, and I learned, and they shut down our business. So I think I learned some lessons there on what it's like to go through an acquisition. Now it's not always rosy. I learned. I worked for a .com high flyer in 1999 and 2000 that raised $800 million. Raised $130 million and hired 800 people in a year, and then crashed and burned. And I learned that, oh my gosh, this is. So I learned a lot of that was like 2000. It was when things were insane, and I guess it was when we were hiring 100 people a month, and you got 3 people doing the same job around the company. They don't even know about each other. I think learned some lessons there about just how fast you can really grow and what's smart and what's not. And that's what I was always skeptical of raising too much money because of that. I think you can raise too much and blow too much and get out of control very fast. And then my company that failed had a weird experience with some investors too that pulled the plug, and then the company never got off the ground. And so I guess I learned a little more skepticism and a little more try to be trust but verify, and be a little more careful about who you take money from, who you hire, and how fast you grow, and that you keep things in control. Because it was saw that whole .com era, late 90s, early 2000s, and it all busted, and I think a lot of people around here now don't even remember that, but it was a tough time.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
We laid off 80% of our company during the .com
Yeah.
crash, so.
No, it was bad, and it was just too much of a bubble, just too much money flying, money being wasted. You remember that was the whole selling dog food on the internet and all that stuff.
No business models were just not there.
Right, and just wastefulness, and that bothered me, but it really hit home when that failed. That you gotta watch the dollars and run your company like your household. You treat it like it's your own money. Be really stingy about it. Don't waste things.
Go, last question.
Yes, I was just interested in how the relationships, how did that all work out? You met at camp, your sons knew each other.
Yeah.
So now, years later, your son's graduating, are you all still friends, and did your son go into engineering?
Yeah, we are still friends. At least the three of us. One's moved out of state, so I don't see him as much. But the other one I see on a weekly basis. Yeah, my co-founder. No, I had. I don't think any of my 3 sons have got the entrepreneurial gene yet, at least. Maybe they'll be like me coming into it later in life. But one of them just took a high-tech sales job. He's more of a sales kind of guy. So I guess like me, but for a larger company. And then the other 2 are in technology, one's studying physics and one's studying math. So they're analytical, quantitative guys, not engineers. None of them are engineers. But, and time will tell if they turn out to be entrepreneurs or not. Right now, they don't seem to go, they seem to be going down more the research path, except for my oldest, who's gonna be a sales and marketing guy.
Now, my last question, with that serendipitous,
Yeah.
meeting, how much do you think, as far as going out there and networking and, do some of it, should we just relax and just let it come to us and just work on building a product? Or just that combination?
I think, yeah, that's interesting. I think you should, I within reason, I think you should go to, what do they call it, where luck, what is that, a quote about, luck is where preparation meets opportunity or something like that, yeah. So I think you do have to, be out and about if you want those serendipitous occasions. I think you have to go to, like Capital Factory events and networking things and participate in activities around town where you're in a position. But I don't think you have to walk into the event at the Capital Factory and put pressure on yourself to meet 15 people. I don't think you have to be, I think to some extent you do have to relax and be yourself. And I've started to recently try to just more feel okay if I just walk out only meeting, one or two people, but maybe try to have a deeper conversation, get to know each of them a little bit more, because I think that sometimes that's better than walking out with 10 business cards and then forgetting about what they all do.
I've got plenty of those.
Yeah, so I don't think you need to be bang, 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 you gotta meet 10 people a day, but I do think to be in those situations, you have to say, sure, I'll go to that event, or sure, I'll go camping with my neighbor, even though, I just moved here last weekend, and and by the way, 9/11 just happened, and I don't know if I feel like going camping, but it was 2001, and yeah, I'll go camping, and that's how I met these guys. So I think you have to put yourself in those, situations where where conversations can come up and chance meetings can come up. When hide in a corner and try to talk to people and on airplanes or whatever. But yeah, I think you can be. I think you can be relaxed about it. I don't think you have to put pressure on yourself. But I wouldn't just let the tide take you where it takes you. That's a little too much. Yeah, structure it a bit.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate spending your evening or your afternoon into the evening with us, learning a little bit about Kevin's venture, and hopefully you learned a little something. Thanks again. Is there anything that I need to say for? Do we have this room for? Is there a meetup happening?
Yeah, no. Let me check. I don't think anything else is happening after this.
Cool.
It starts at 7, so there's an hour.
Cool. Well, I'll stick around for a couple minutes. You may have an obligation or something to head off to, but if anybody wants to chat about Capital Factory, about what we do here, happy to entertain. And thanks for coming, everybody.
So this is pretty typical one?
Yeah, we're working on some people to some of these.
Do some people bring slides?
Much better.
No. This is exactly how it goes.
So the one that's
Completely.
developing product managers, not the biggest.
No, it was awesome.
Johnny Five.
Hey, we've met before, haven't we? What's your name? No, Christopher. Yeah, familiar. Maybe
I
I've
just
just
met
seen you
him.
around here. I've just seen you around here. You been here much?
3 times.
Yeah.
I love it. It's home, not yet, but it's home.
Yeah. So you look familiar to me, huh?
Yeah, sitting out there quite a bit.
Yeah.
But this is Digimat. I'll let you. So it's a mat itself, right? You can use it as anything, but it's in between multiple clear plastic flexible materials. And then it's an LED light source.
So which one are you hitting up at
Goes
6:30?
to any somewhat transparent image that can be controlled by remote.
Yeah, I mean, we probably have a couple others going on. Do you remember which one?
We kind of drew it up.
We take these.
I wanted to take over it. Yeah, I mean.
So where's the light source coming from?
It's underneath it. So then the image is somewhat transparent. So it just illuminates.
where you walk up.
Okay, yeah, nice to meet you.
You walk up and